Guys, we really almost did it. This is it. This is the very last text talk of second grade, and it's going to happen on Juneteenth, June 19th, 2020. What's Juneteenth? Well, I'm learning about it, and you're going to learn about it with me. So we're going to read a book today about Juneteenth. And before we do, I want you to know there's part of this book is a little bit scary. It's one page, one scary page. It talks about the realities of what slavery and becoming enslaved was, and it's only one page long, and it's the true fact, but it's kind of scary, so just know. And then once you get through it, it gets into the celebration and stuff from there. So I want you to know that before we start. But you're going to learn about Juneteenth, which happens on June 19th. So let's do this. I think you're going to like it. It's a good book. I'm going to read it. No writing today. Just I might stop and ask you some questions to think about. But before we start that, I want you to think this is how we spell Juneteenth. June, and then 19th is the date. And over the years, the June and the 19th got mixed together, and it became one word, Juneteenth. And it is an American jubilee. And a jubilee just means a celebration. Jubilee is a celebration. So before we start, I want you to look at this timeline, and this is some stuff we covered last week. So remember in 1619, so long ago, the first slave ships arrived in North America. So then you go through, let's think about 100 years later is 1719, and then roughly 50, 60 years after that, 1776, and this is the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, all of that. Right, so all of this time is over 100 years of slavery here, and then almost 100 more before finally the Civil War begins in 1861. In 1863, President Lincoln declares Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863. He says slaves are no longer slaves. And then it takes 2 years before, in 1865, the news of being freed reaches the people in Galveston, Texas. So what happened was after President Lincoln announced no more slavery, a lot of the people who owned the slaves just kept slaving. Because remember, when you were enslaved, you weren't allowed to read or write, so you weren't getting any newspaper, and it wouldn't be in the best interest of the slave owner to tell the slave that they were now free, would it be? So they didn't tell them. So as a result, it took 2 long years before finally somebody from the government rode out all the way to Texas and gave the news of freedom. And then at this point, of course, there was a jubilee, and all the people were very, very happy. We're free, we're free, we're free. So then it was a year later in 1866 when the first Juneteenth was celebrated. So think of that. 1863, no more slavery, but it was 2 more years before the slaves in Texas found out that they were free. So then a year after that, a year of freedom later, they had a big party. And every June 19th, we can celebrate Juneteenth. And then just to put it in perspective, about 100 years after that was when Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. And then you can see it's not too far away from 1963 to today in 2020. So just to give you kind of an idea of where we are at. So that's your timeline. I may refer back to this in a moment. There we go. And let's take a look at this book. Juneteenth by Vaunda, Micheaux, Nelson, and Drew Nelson, with illustrations by Mark Schroeder. This page is intentionally left blank. Juneteenth. There's the man. Jubilee! It is June 19th, 1865, a hot day in Texas. Clouds decorate the bright blue sky. On a farm outside the city of Galveston, a man hoes corn. 5 miles away, a teenage boy chops wood. Nearby, a woman scrubs the floor. Her sister milks a cow in the barn. Seems like a normal day. Then a message arrives in Galveston. It races from ear to ear through town. The message is carried to the countryside by riders on horseback. It is carried by wagon and by people on foot. The people on foot are running because the message is so important. How does he look? He's probably happy. When the news reaches the man in the cornfield, tears roll down his cheeks. 5 miles away, the young woodcutter plants his axe in a stump and runs to hug his father. Nearby, the woman stops scrubbing and dances across the wet floor. Her sister drops a bucket of milk and falls to her knees. As the news spreads across Texas, people stop working and jump for joy. These men, women, and children were not ordinary workers. They were black slaves. The news that arrived on June 19th changed their lives forever. On that day, General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston. He read an order from President Abraham Lincoln. The order said that the slaves were free. Ever seen reading that? Why do you think it took more than 2 years for the news to reach the people in Texas? It's far away. That's true. This was good news, but it was old news. President Lincoln had given the order in 1863, but slaves in some places were not told right away. It took more than 2 years for the order to reach Texas slaves. When it finally did, the streets of Galveston rang with black voices shouting, "We're free! We're free! Hooray!" So this is the part where it gets a little bit scary. Slavery. But how did these black people become slaves? Well, imagine that you were playing outside. Suddenly, you are captured in a net like an animal. You're packed in the bottom of a ship with many other stolen people. You are taken far away to another country. You are forced to stand naked on a platform called an auction block. A man pays money for you. He owns you now. You are his slave. You must do everything he says, and he can do whatever he wants to you. He can make you work. He can put chains on you. He can whip you, even kill you. And you never again see your home or your family. Oof. Beginning in 1619, remember at the beginning, these things happened to millions of African people. They were taken to North America and to other places as slaves. Why did Americans want slaves? Well, some people in the North wanted housekeepers and farmhands. Many Southerners needed people to work on their plantations. Plantations were huge farms for cotton, tobacco, corn, and other crops. Plantation owners sold these crops to make money. The owners could keep more money if they did not have to pay the people who worked for them. They did not pay slaves. Now here we are in Civil War. War, 1861 to 1865. Not everyone wanted slavery. Many people in the North and some in the South wanted to free the slaves. They knew that slavery was wrong, and they spoke against it. They believed that all people are created equal. Most Southerners did not want slavery to end. Without slaves, who would pick their crops and chop their wood? Who would cook their meals and clean their houses? Also, many white people believed that they were better than black people. They believed that black people were not equal, so slaves did not deserve to be free. Oof. Northern leaders would not give up, and the southern states would not give in. So finally, a group of southern states decided that they could no longer be a part of the United States, and they broke away and formed the Confederate States of America. Now the country was divided into two parts, the Confederacy in the South and the Union in the North. On April 12, 1861, armies from the two sides began to fight. This was the start of the Civil War. Freedom. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln signed a special order called the Emancipation Proclamation. It said that slaves in the Confederate States were forever free. Many plantation owners did not tell their slaves about President Lincoln's order. They wanted the slaves to keep working. Even when the owners knew that the South would lose the war, they wanted one more free harvest. But Union soldiers brought the news to slaves as the troops moved through the South. Those slaves spread the word to others. Thousands of freed slaves joined the Union Army to help win the war. And here you can see these men have been freed, and now they've put on the blue uniforms of the Union Army. That's the North side Army, the Union, and now the American Army, the United States Army, not the Confederate Army. They were gray. Some Texas slaves heard tales about freedom, but they couldn't be sure that these stories were true. Slaves had to be careful. If they even talked about freedom, their owners might punish them. Slaves who tried to leave the plantations could be whipped or killed. All they could do was wait and hope. Finally, in April 1865, the Union won the Civil War. More than 700,000 people from the North and the South had died fighting in this war. On June 19th, Union General Granger brought the news of freedom to Galveston. Texas was the last state where the official announcement was made. Slaves no more. Not everyone believed the announcement. More than 200 years had passed since the first Africans were captured and brought to North America in 1619. By 1865, most slaves in North America had been born in North America. The only life they knew was slavery. Then, in an instant, they were free. Seems pretty good. Here's the thing. Once the slaves knew the truth, they stopped working. The moment was scary and wonderful. They were free. They laughed and cried, shouted and prayed. They danced and sang, gathered and hugged. They imagined their lives as free Americans. Some former slaves left the plantations with just the clothes on their backs. They had nothing else. They didn't know where they were going. They were just happy to be free to go anywhere. Many searched for loved ones who had been sold to other plantations. Some were reunited with their families. Others never found their parents or their children. Some former slaves found jobs in cities. Others could not because white people wouldn't hire them. Many stayed on plantations because they had nowhere else to go. The slaves were free, but black Americans would struggle for equal rights for a long time. Still, the end of slavery brought great joy and a reason to celebrate. And here they are celebrating. The children dancing with the parents. Juneteenth. On June 19th, 1866, 1 year after they had learned of their freedom, former slaves came together to celebrate. The city of Galveston was alive with music. The sweet, smoky smell of barbecue filled the air. Black Texans were wearing their Sunday best. They gathered and hugged. They shared news and told stories. They sang spirituals celebrating freedom. No more slavery chains for me, no more, no more. Folks attended ceremonies, worship services, and parades to mark the day. This was the first of many June 19th celebrations in Texas. When black Texans moved to other states, they took the tradition with them. But how did June 19th become Juneteenth? Well, at first, Texans called it Freedom Day, Emancipation Day, Jubilee, or simply June 19th. As years passed and freedom's stories were told and retold, June and 19th blurred together into Juneteenth. Today, Juneteenth is celebrated much like that first anniversary in 1866. People of all colors arrive at parks, churches, schools, and backyards for picnics. The sweet, smoky smell of barbecue fills the air. Potato salad, corn on the cob, biscuits, homemade ice cream, cakes, pies, and melons crowd the tables. Red velvet cake and red soda pop are traditional treats. Red honors all the people whose blood was shed in slavery and in the struggle for freedom. So if you drink, you can drink a red drink in celebration of Juneteenth. Festive parades, or maybe red popsicles. Festive parades fill city streets and with music and dancing. Black cowboys and cowgirls clop through town on horses. Miss Juneteenth waves from a decorated float. Folks stroll along, singing songs of freedom and patriotism. Spirited baseball games bring whoops and hollers from excited fans. Foot races, sack races, and rodeos spark cheers and laughter. Sounds like a lot of good old-fashioned American fun to me. At the cakewalk, people clap their hands and tap their feet. Dancers turn and leap, strut and quick-step to win the grand prize, a delicious cake. Worship services and readings of the Emancipation Proclamation are important parts of Juneteenth. Speakers tell and retell stories of slavery and freedom. They share tales of why Texas slaves were last to get the news. One legend says that the first messenger sent with the proclamation was murdered along the way. Another story says he was given a very, very slow mule to ride. People laugh, but no one forgets the real reason for the late news. No one forgets that Juneteenth is not just a day to have fun. It is a time to remember. And the real reason is because the slave owners didn't want the people to know they were free. It's time to remember. Juneteenth is celebrated in big or small ways almost everywhere in the United States. The government of Texas made it a state holiday on January 1st, 1980. From Florida to Alaska, California to New Jersey, other states across the nation have followed this example. Some people believe that June 19th should be a national holiday, like Thanksgiving or the 4th of July. Wherever it is celebrated, Juneteenth is a time to sing praises for the end of slavery in the United States. Freedom Days. Americans have different ideas about when to celebrate the end of slavery. Some people think it should be January 1st, the day that President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Others feel that December 18th, 1865 was the true day. On this date, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution became law. This amendment ended slavery in all of the states. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves only in the Confederate States. There are people who honor the date when slaves were freed in their own state. Whatever date you choose, freedom is worth celebrating. I'm not going to sing that song because I do not know it, but it seems like it's probably a pretty good song. So, if you are watching this on June 19th, then you should treat yourself to a nice red drink, maybe some red cake or a red popsicle in honor of freedom and the end of slavery in the United States. Peace and love, unity and respect. And that's all. Happy Juneteenth, everybody.